Hello, everyone, and good evening. My name is Emilio Parga. I'm from Reno, Nevada. I started a nonprofit organization called the Solace Tree. I'm a former school teacher, school counselor, and adaptive PE teacher. I spent a lot of my life in high school and out of high school working with the California and Nevada Special Olympics, where I got to learn a little bit about how children grieve due to how they were born, raised, divorce, incarceration, car accidents. And it was an awesome opportunity for me to learn how children were being raised from my own experiences to a special needs school. My father died when I was 10, so when I left my school counseling position, it was basically like, well, what can we do to our community, our society, and our neighborhood that they weren't doing when my father died when I was 10? So we started a nonprofit called the Solace Tree for grieving children, teens, and families, so we could bring people together to educate, inspire, and let other children know that other people could listen to them without telling them how to grieve, right? Because who's training the trainers? Who's educating? We know from Johns Hopkins University, and I'm an adjunct at the Nevada School of Medicine, that doctors at Johns Hopkins get 8 hours of grief training. The Nevada School of Medicine gets 4. I do 3 out of those hours. As a former school teacher and school counselor, we got 0. So who's training the trainers, right? Kids are the experts. We've given these kids an opportunity to talk about stuff. I do want to say, too, and I forgot to mention this earlier, but thank you so much, WITF, for bringing me here. When asked if I would speak with Leslie Delp, let me tell you, I asked, and I was promised that I would not speak after her, so thank you so much for not having me speak behind her. She is a pioneer in this field, and I know we're in Pennsylvania, but from Reno, when I'm in Florida, Seattle, or Los Angeles, Leslie Delp, the executive director and founder of Olivia's House, is in that conversation. So a lot of what I speak of, it's happening in Pennsylvania, it's happening in Reno. And so I'm just so grateful to be here, and I just want to say thank you so much. Let's take a look at how can we help children get through this. And a lot of the trainings that we do is just being present. So many people in the beginning were like, oh my gosh, you want to leave your school counseling job to work with grieving children? I'm like, yeah, why wouldn't I? I mean, who's helping these children? These kids will get over it. I mean, no one's going to come to you. They're going to be all white people. And I'm like, no, because we're going to go into all these different communities, and we're going to say, here's what we're doing. Here's how we're supporting kids. We know, because one of the things that I do as an executive director is we explain death to children. We prepare children for funerals. No matter what that family is doing, we come in with scripts and we talk about it. But I think we need to be comfortable with our own mortality. We need to consider culture and religion. And I think, number one, we first and foremost need to review our own losses. We all come from different families. We were raised differently. My dad died and my mother abandoned me. So my grandmother raised me, much older than my parents. And she's had losses in her life. She was an older woman. So I was dealing with some of the stuff that she was dealing with because my dad, her son, had died. And so I think when we work with grieving children, we must be comfortable with our own mortality, but we must know what's happened in our life. How can we sit with the grieving children if we're not grieving at all, right? Or if we think they're too young. Really, because my first case ever 9 years ago was explaining suicide to a 4-year-old in front of the family. And that's what we do. They're never too young, and we should never underestimate a child's ability to grieve. And that's universal. You'll hear Leslie talk about that. I'm talking about it now. These kids just want us to be present. They want us just to listen. We need to be ourselves, right? We all come from different backgrounds. We all grieve differently. We've all had different deaths, different milestones. We've had different losses. We're not all the same in the way we grieve and the way we live. And then we get in relationships, then we get married, and different things form, and different things happen to us. We must be aware of our own values and beliefs. Anytime I go into anybody's house and we explain death to a child, how their mother died of suicide, car accident, cancer, there's so many variables. We want to ask the family first, how many deaths have you had? How can we explain this to the child age appropriately? So this child will kind of understand, but also come back and ask us questions. We don't want to give this child all this information, right? And again, it goes back to who's training the trainers. We have to go get that training. No one's going to teach it to us at a university, other than now I think there's New York University, Hood College, and universities now are starting to present certificates and bachelor's and master's degrees on death and dying. So that's been awesome too. We must be sensitive and respect differences. So many people think just because this child is white or African American, they're going to go to their pastors, or they're just white Anglo-Saxon, or if they're Jewish, they're just going to go right to their church, right? It doesn't work that way. Every home is different. Every child is built differently. We're built so differently. How do we help these kids? We're present. We want to follow up with these kids and these families. We prepare children for the funerals, and then we want to continue to see how they're doing in their church and their school, in their sports. Because I know in this room, and I'm not going to assume or judge, because this field just kicks it right out, that there's been death in this room. And I know in this room, there's unresolved grief. Can we agree with that? There's that unresolved grief. My dad died in 1980, and if it wasn't for the Solace Tree 9 years ago, I'd still be dealing with that because I couldn't go to the funeral because I was 10 years old, and they just felt like I was too young, right? So there's my part right there. Little Pennsylvania flavor right there, right? Oops. So one of the things that inspired me 9 years ago is learning a little bit about Mr. Rogers and a lot of the stuff that he was doing, right? Way before Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. That was a model in the 60s, and that was a great model for this death-denying society that we live in, right? But you know what Mr. Rogers was doing? He was already creating videos and doing commercials on and booklets on how to explain death to a child, how to explain the death of a goldfish, how to explain the death of a parent to a child. He was doing all that stuff in the 60s. As Kubler-Ross, Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was creating her 5 stages of grief, he was doing that. And the one thing that inspired me, I was already a preschool teacher, I was a school counselor, but the one thing that inspired me to do the work that I do is he said, what's mentionable is manageable, and what's manageable is mentionable. I thought, wow. Because when we sit with kids and they talk about missing something, right? Because cognitively they can understand, where's their mom or dad? But they have siblings, and we're kind of trying to talk to them about what's happening because schedules and routines have changed. They're trying their world through play. But just think the teenagers, they're talking not only about the death, but they're talking about sex and religion and relationships, the deceased, the surviving, their religion, culture, traditions, rituals. They're kind of caught up between an adult and also the teen years. I love this this cartoon here by Family Circus. When Granddad went to heaven, did he ever write back and tell us how he likes it? Who's starting that conversation right here? What an awesome opportunity, a teachable moment, right? To talk to these young children about Grandpa. We disenfranchise grandparents, the death of a grandparent, the death of a step-parent, the death of a pet, so much because we live in such a death-denying society and nobody wants to talk about it. In our program, we don't talk about death. Everybody knows they're there because someone died. They talk about sex and relationships, a new car, job, school. They know that someone's died. They already feel nervous and weird. They already know that in their household someone's dying or has died, so they want to be listened to. They want to be heard. And I think this right here is an awesome opportunity, and we've either seen this, heard this, but we know that what an awesome opportunity. That mom right there has an opportunity to share what has happened to grandfather. So in our program that we started, we wrote books with kids. We how can we start the conversation? Because one of the things that I was doing was explaining death to children, and I kind of just got thrusted into that because I was just doing peer support groups, and that's what our center does. And then we added camps, and we added a whole bunch of other things for the volunteers and the kids. But this is for young children from 5 to 9. And it's an opportunity, it's a journal for kids. Here are special memories of. And it's an opportunity for young children to talk about death with a parent or caregiver. And it was an awesome opportunity for them after we sat down for a year building this book. So not only could we use it in our center, but other centers could use it, right? So we could put it in the schools. Here's another book called I Will Never Forget You that we wrote with the teenagers. And they have some awesome questions in here, not only to help themselves, but help others. One of my favorite projects that we did, Kids Can Cope. It was children living with someone who had a disease, cancer, or illness. And this is a memory book for them. And they have coupons and bracelets. But the one thing I loved about this is it was imminent. Someone was going to die. How do we start that conversation with children? We were getting up on the bed, talking before the adult was going into a coma, talking about, yes, I am dying and I will die. So let's talk about it. Here's what we're going to do when the funeral comes. We want mom to wear this, or we want this to be in the casket, or we want her to do this, and we want him to do that. And it was an amazing opportunity. The one story I want to leave with this is this one woman, and there was about 20 people in the house, and we're building this book. And mom had just went into a coma and like, oh my gosh, mom always wanted a tattoo, but she said she wasn't ready yet. Over in the corner, young children were like, well, there's some Sharpies over here. So and I'm a stranger, but all of us wrote on their mom messages. And her body was just covered with, tattoos, Sharpies, right? Messages, I love you, I'll miss you, poems, words, hearts, stars, cars, mountains, trees. It was an amazing thing. The children are the teachers. The children teach us so much. How do we prepare them for death? They're not mature psychologically enough to have these skills that help them cope. They look to us as models. They're turning to us. That's why I said earlier, if you're not comfortable with your own mortality, this isn't going to work. Because kids ask questions about suicide. They ask questions about God. God comes up in our program maybe once a season. Who am I to say, here's what I think about God? I can say succinctly, here's what I believe, but let's go to the group and let's find out what everyone else believes in God and how they celebrated the funeral or the memorial while their parent or sibling or caregiver died. And that's an awesome opportunity to learn for the kids. I'm an expert on my own grief, but when I learn from the kids, that's awesome stuff. And a lot of the stuff that I'm sharing is just watershed. There's just so much information that we keep learning from the children and the teens about a person who's dying or has died. How well the children are prepared. Who's preparing the children? How do we know what the child knows, right? Unless they've shared. When I tell my school counselors and my teachers, and I'll say it to this group too, and I love to start it up because I was just in Vegas speaking to over 300 counselors. You're busy, but when a child comes up to you and says, I need to talk to you about something, my dog died, or this is the anniversary of my parent or aunt or grandmother, you're not that busy, because we don't know if that one child is telling because he or she trusts us. That one time they need us to listen, that one time. We don't talk at the Solace Tree, really. As adults, they do all the talking. We listen to them. And we're never too busy for a child, because I know this, when children have left and we've said, I'm busy, we don't know if they're suicidal, right? We don't know what they're going to do. We know that they're self-destructing or destructing towards others. So we need to listen. We're not that busy. I'll tell the medical, and this is the only field that I know they're super busy, and I'd like to get into it with them, and I'm not picking on them. But because of the profession and where they are, I tell doctors, no matter what, you're not that busy, though. You're not that busy. As we try and change that bedside manner, we just need them to be present. This isn't present when a child's standing right here. This is, right, or this is. Because they need that. They need to know that we're listening to them. What was their relationship with the deceased and the surviving? We need to listen to them. We know that language in our program has changed. Nobody wants to hear, especially bereaved parents and adults, I'm so sorry that your husband died. I'm so sorry that your child died. Nobody wants to hear that anymore. They want to know that they're saddened by the death of your husband. It makes them sad when they hear that your son died, because they hear sorry all the time, right? But when they know that you're saddened or you're sad, and they ask questions about the funeral or the memorial, or what's going to happen, they remember a special memory. I'll remember this one memory of your son or your husband. The language has changed in this field, because so many people are sick of hearing that I'm sorry and I'm sorry and I'm sorry. And we do it because we just say those things. But they want you to ask questions about their spouse or their child or their parent, because they're an adult. They want to know that you care and that you're listening. And that's what we've learned in our program. And the quality of care afterwards. What are we doing to support our children? Unresolved grief plays so many emotional issues in our lives. Some of you agreed when I said there is unresolved grief in this room. Yes or no? Some are nodding now. There is. Because I have to believe you are saying right now, because we're in York, Pennsylvania, don't you wish you had a place like Olivia's house when you were a child, a teen, just a few years ago, right? Because we all say that. An opportunity to share and talk and play and have someone listen to you. And I found the statistics by Dr. Black. Mental health problems presented by adults often stem from unresolved grief, unresolved childhood losses. I just feel like, because of the work that we're in, I learned it in counseling, if these kids find out you're not listening to them, they do other things because they're mad, they're angry. When children are lied to because their parent died of a suicide, and some parents said, because it happens, that their parent died of a car accident, they're going to steal. They feel betrayed. 12-year-old girls are going to get on the pill. 15-year-old boys are going to use drugs because they've been betrayed, especially those who have found the suicide letters. They don't want to be lied to. We can talk to children. We can listen to children. I've kind of taken that out of my vocabulary as well. And I love this piece here, creating the grief awareness, some interventions in the school. Not only do we have our grief program, but we've started programs in the school called Good Grief Clubs and Classrooms in Grief, where we can go into the schools and co-facilitate grief groups, peer support groups, with the school counselor, which I think is just so awesome, from preschool to high school. Because some of them can't make it to our program. Or we're at the University of Nevada, Reno. Reno's really not that big. But we're in school now because they have sports, they have arts, they have other programs, foster children, homeless children, kids who come to school half-time. Let's go into the school and let's create these grief groups because it's safe there. They need to tell their story, ladies and gentlemen. They need to tell their story. We need to listen and listen more. In group, there's kids who have been telling that story over and over and over. But 5- and 6-year-olds are bringing in iPhones, and they're also bringing in Led Zeppelin t-shirts. Because that's how we get kids to talk about death. We're not saying, you need to bring that in. We're saying, bring some memorabilia, and I'd love to see that picture of your dad or your brother. And they get to share. A huge buzzword in this field is continuing bonds. They do it at the Solace Tree. They do it at Olivia's house. Who wants to be forgotten when they die? Show of hands. These kids, I'm sure, don't want their parent to be forgotten. And I know the surviving adult doesn't want their child to ever forget, because kids ask, well, his clothes always smell the same? I might forget his voice or what it was like. What's going to happen? The kids who can cognitively understand a little bit about what's happening in that memory making. From Olivia's house to the Solace Tree, it's all about memory making. How can we continue to help these children continuously create these memories so they can have great memories? Not everyone who dies is loved either, I can tell you right now. But there's some memory, and how do we continue to make those memories on and on and on so there isn't that unresolved grief? They need a safe place. Actually, children and play. Let me just talk for a second about children and play. Toys are their tools. It's their language. Most grief centers in the nation don't have 2- to 5-year-olds. But we believe, too, that those children will be 6- to 10-year-olds, right? Will be teenagers, will be young adults. Grief is a family process. If we bring those young children in, we don't need to say, now, why are you here? They just play, because eventually they'll be 6 and 9. And cognitively, between 8 and 9, when they start realizing a little more that their mom and dad, grandma, grandpa, brother and sister is never coming back, we've set them up for tools. Though a life has ended, the relationship has never ended and will never end, depending on how that family celebrates that person who is no longer here physically. And lastly, I want to say, too, that Leo Biscaglia, who wrote books, Freddie the Fallen Leaf, was one of the first books I had in my hand when explaining death to a child. He wrote books on grief and also on love. And this is for everyone here, and I just felt like it was apropos for this audience. But too often we underestimate the power of a touch, a word, a listening ear, an honest compliment, or the smallest act of caring, of which have the potential to turn a life around. We're at the Nevada School of Medicine to change the way doctors explain that someone's dying to young children, but also can explain the death of a parent or sibling to a child. I'm working, I think, smart but hard on that. They need to be a part of that. They blame doctors when someone dies, and we let them know that the doctors did their, and the nurses and the child life specialists and that team did their very, 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 very best to keep your dad alive. And bad things happen to good people. And we talk about that team. But we know that they're blaming doctors. So we're changing that by being present. We're changing that by being present. And that's all we're doing. That's all we're doing in Reno. We have a camp up in camp at Lake Tahoe. That's all we're doing. There's more joy, I know this, at the Solace Tree in Olivia's house than there is sorrow. But the girls, because we're seeing more boys and men than ever before, are teaching these young boys and these men that crying is okay. There was something about this culture and society when, I guess, men don't grieve. But the girls are showing the boys, and that's what I love about these peer support groups. It's not counseling, it's not therapy. No one's giving their opinion. Suggestions when asked. But the boys get to see the girls cry. And when different cultures come in there and say, I can only cry in here, we're doing our job. Because they feel safe there. We're giving children, teens, and those adults, and in our program, 12 cultures and 7 different religions. We're giving them a permission to grieve, to say it's okay, you can cry here. And if you want to say all the things you want to say about the person who died, because not everyone who dies is loved, then we're saying it's safe here. And in 9 years, 8 kids have said, I'm either going to kill myself or I'm going to kill someone else. We also have learned about abuse and incest. So not only are we supporting, I think we're saving lives. And I can tell you right now, to have Olivia's house in your community is a huge gift. Because some of you who said, yeah, I wish there was a program like that in where I was born or my city, or if you lived here and it was in your community, I wish it would have happened to me, because I did also turn to drugs, alcohol, and everything else. And I hung out with the wrong crowd because nobody would listen to me. That's why we started the nonprofit in our community. We felt like we could contribute to society by bringing adults and saying, we'll listen to you. We don't know exactly how you feel, but we're also sad. And we want to help you learn to live with this. Because there is no magic ending to grief. Can we all agree with that? There is no magic ending to grief. So thank you, WITF. And how about the testosterone in the room too, ladies? Right? Because you don't see very many men. We don't see very many men. And so as nonprofit organizations, we recruit the men to be mentors and to be present, to let the young boys and girls know that we do care, we do grieve, we are sad. Someone died in our life, and we're here to be present, we're here to play with you, we're also here to listen to you. No one's going to judge you. No one's going to tell you exactly how to feel or how did that make you feel. We're not there for that. We're there just to let them know that another person in your community or the grief center is there to listen to you and know that we care. So thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.